Did you know the average medieval siege lasted for months, sometimes years? The siege of Kenilworth in 1266 went on for 6 months. The defenders held out against an entire royal army. They weren't just fighting with swords and arrows. They were fighting with time. They were fighting with psychology. They were using strategy. We think of the medieval period as a brutal, simple time. Men in iron suits hitting each other with big pieces of metal. But that's not the whole story. Their world was a chessboard of life and death. Every decision, every move had consequences. They had to think about resources, morale, terrain, and the enemy's mind. They couldn't afford to waste energy on things that didn't work. So what can these old, dusty strategies teach us? We don't face trebuchets or knights on horseback, but we do face our own sieges, a difficult project at work, a long-term illness, a relationship that feels like a battle. We fight for promotions, for our ideas, for a sense of peace. Our battlefields are different. The rules of engagement have changed. But has human nature? Has the nature of conflict? What if the key to breaking through your modern problems lies in the thinking of a 13th century general? What if a knight's code of conduct could fix your career? These aren't just historical curiosities. They are time-tested blueprints for navigating a complex world. They are about how to win when the stakes are high, and for us, just like for them, the stakes are everything. Number 22, how do we stand together when everything tries to pull us apart? The shield wall. You've seen it in movies. Vikings or Saxons standing shoulder to shoulder. Their round shields interlocked, a wall of wood, leather, and iron. It looks simple, but it was one of the most effective military formations for centuries. It wasn't about individual heroes. It was about the man next to you. Your life depended on him holding his shield steady. His life depended on you. If one person broke formation, a gap would open, and through that gap, death would pour in. The entire wall could collapse because of one person's failure. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 is a famous example. The English Saxons used a shield wall on top of a hill. The Norman cavalry charged it again and again. For hours, the wall held. It was a testament to discipline, trust, and shared purpose. Each man wasn't just protecting himself, he was a small part of a much larger, stronger whole. The strength wasn't in the individual shields, it was in the overlap. We don't carry shields anymore, but we face attacks every day, stress at work, financial pressure, family crises, political division. It's easy to feel isolated, it's easy to think you have to face it all alone. The modern world encourages individualism. Be a self-starter, be a lone wolf. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but the shield wall teaches a different lesson. True strength is collective. It's found in the small, reliable spaces between people. Your family can be a shield wall. Your team at work can be one. Your close friends can be one. It's about mutual support. It's about knowing that when you're having a bad day, the person next to you will hold their ground and cover you. And you will do the same for them. It's not about everyone being a superstar. Well, it's about everyone being reliable. In the late 2010s, Google conducted a massive internal study called Project Aristotle. They wanted to figure out what made their most effective teams tick. They looked at everything. The mix of skills, the personalities, how often they socialized. They thought the answer would be about putting the best people together. But it wasn't. The single biggest predictor of a successful team was something they called psychological safety. It was a shared belief that you could take risks, ask dumb questions, or admit a mistake without being punished or humiliated. Team members felt safe with each other. In other words, they had formed a shield wall. They trusted each other enough to be vulnerable. That trust allowed them to work together seamlessly, to innovate, and to solve hard problems. The strength wasn't in the individual geniuses. It was in the overlap. It was in the trust that held them together. The lesson from a 9th century Viking battlefield is the same one found in the data of a 21st century tech giant. We are stronger together. But when does a shield wall stop being a source of strength and become a prison? At what point does that interlocking defense prevent new ideas from getting in or individuals from growing out? And is our modern praise of the team just a corporate version of the shield wall, designed to suppress individual dissent for the good of the company's bottom line? Number 21. What if the best way to win is to let the other person make the first move? Picking your ground. A medieval commander knew this was often more important than the size of his army. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415 is the classic example. The English army, led by Henry V, was exhausted, sick, and massively outnumbered by the French. On paper, they should have been annihilated. But Henry was smart. He chose the battlefield. He positioned his army on a narrow strip of land between two dense forests. It had recently rained, and the ground was a muddy bog. This terrain completely negated the main French advantage, their heavy cavalry. The knights, in their shining armor, couldn't charge. Their horses got stuck in the mud. They became slow, easy targets for the English longbowmen. The French had the bigger army. But the English had chosen the ground. They forced the French to fight on English terms. And they won a legendary victory. This wasn't just luck, it was a deliberate strategic choice. Don't fight where your enemy is strong. Make them come to you where you are strong. We face conflicts every day. An argument with a spouse, a negotiation with a boss, a debate online. Our instinct is often to charge in, to react immediately, to fight the battle on whatever ground it happens to start. But this is like the French cavalry charging into the mud. You're playing to the other person's strengths. Choosing your ground means taking a step back. It means asking yourself, when and where should this conversation happen? Should I respond to that angry email right now, from my phone, while I'm emotional? Or should I wait until tomorrow when I'm calm and address it in person? That's choosing your ground. It's about controlling the when and the where. An argument over text message is a different battlefield than a face-to-face conversation. A salary negotiation in your boss's office puts you on their turf. Suggesting a neutral space, like a coffee shop or a conference room, changes the dynamic. You are taking control of the environment. You are making them fight on your terms, or at least on neutral ones. The concept of home field advantage is well documented in sports psychology. A 2011 study by Nick Neve and Sandy Wolfson confirmed that teams playing at home have a significant advantage. It's not just about crowd support. It's about familiarity, control, and a sense of territory. Hormonally, athletes even show higher testosterone levels when playing at home. They are primed for dominance in their own space. This psychological principle applies outside of sports. When you control the environment of a difficult conversation or a high-stakes meeting, you give yourself a hidden advantage. You are calmer, more confident, you can think more clearly, you are not reacting to their environment. You are acting within your own. Like Henry V, you are letting the terrain do half the work for you. It's a quiet form of power. But how do you choose your ground when the battlefield is your own mind, filled with anxiety and self-doubt? Can you ever truly control the terrain of a conflict when the other person is unpredictable, irrational, or simply doesn't care about your chosen rules? And what happens when the only ground available is the one where you are weakest? Number 20, how do you solve a problem that's too big to fight directly? Sapping and mining. Castles were the ultimate defense. Their thick stone walls seemed impenetrable. Charging them head-on was suicide, so armies developed a cleverer, quieter way to bring them down. They would dig tunnels called saps or mines up to the base of the castle wall. It was slow, dangerous work, done in secret, often at night. Once they reached the foundation, they would dig out a chamber underneath the wall, propping it up with wooden beams. Then they would pack the chamber with flammable material like pig fat and brushwood and set it on fire. The fire would burn away the wooden supports. The foundation above the chamber would lose its support, and a whole section of the massive stone wall would come crashing down. The castle's greatest strength, its wall, was defeated not by a direct assault, but by patiently and quietly undermining its foundation. The fall of St. Andrew's Castle in 1547 involved some of the most extensive siege mining of its time, creating a network of tunnels and counter-tunnels under the earth. You have problems that feel like castle walls, a huge debt, a deeply ingrained bad habit, a toxic workplace culture. Trying to tackle them head-on feels impossible. You push and nothing moves. You get discouraged, you give up. Sapping is about changing the approach. Instead of attacking the wall, you attack the foundation. What is the problem resting on? What are the hidden supports that keep it in place? For a bad habit like smoking, the wall is the addiction itself. A direct assault just trying to stop often fails. The foundation might be the things that support the habit, the stress that triggers it, the social situations where you always smoke, the morning coffee you associate with a cigarette. Sapping means addressing those foundations. Find a new way to handle stress. Avoid those social situations for a while. Change your morning routine. You aren't fighting the craving directly. You are patiently removing the things that hold it up. Eventually, the whole structure of the habit becomes unstable, and it's much easier to bring down. Psychologist Charles Duhigg, in his book The Power of Habit, explains the habit loop. It consists of a cue, a routine, and a reward. To change a habit, the wall, you can't just eliminate the routine. You have to identify the cue and the reward that form its foundation. Research from the 1990s at MIT on rats showed how habits form as neurological pathways in the basal ganglia. These pathways don't just disappear, but you can build new ones. By identifying the cue, e.g., feeling bored, and the reward, e.g., a momentary distraction, you can insert a new routine. Instead of opening social media, you walk around the block. You are undermining the old habit by digging a new tunnel, creating a new pathway. You aren't destroying the wall with a battering ram. You are causing it to collapse by changing what it stands on. It's a slower, more strategic, and ultimately more effective approach. But what if you can't identify the foundation of a problem? What if a bad habit or a toxic situation is so deeply embedded that it seems to have no supports? It just is. And is there a risk that in digging underneath our problems, we might accidentally collapse something important we didn't intend to destroy? It's number 19. Are your plans strong enough to survive contact with reality? Defense in depth. Imagine a castle. It doesn't just have one big wall. It has multiple layers of defense. First, there's a ditch or a moat. If the enemy crosses that, they face an outer wall. If they breach that, they find themselves in an open area, the outer bailey, where they are exposed to arrows from the inner wall. If they somehow get through the gate of the inner wall, they still have to face the keep, the strongest, most heavily fortified tower at the very center. Each layer is designed to slow the enemy down, to wear them out, and to provide a fallback position for the defenders. If one line of defense fails, the battle isn't over. This strategy was used by the Byzantine Empire for centuries. Their frontiers weren't hard lines, but deep militarized zones. They would allow invaders to penetrate, then harass their supply lines and attack them when they were overextended. They traded space for time, grinding the enemy down. It's a strategy that acknowledges that your first line of defense will probably fail. The key is what happens next. We love to make a single perfect plan, the plan A. We invest everything in it. The perfect business proposal, the perfect diet, the perfect career path, and then reality hits. The client rejects the proposal. We eat a piece of cake, we get laid off, and because we only had one wall, the entire castle collapses. We feel like a total failure. Defense in depth is about building backup plans. It's about asking, what if? What if plan A fails? What is plan B? What is my fallback position if that fails too? What is my last line of defense, my keep? For a career, plan A might be to get a promotion. The outer wall. If that doesn't happen, plan B might be to look for a job at a different company. The inner wall. If that doesn't work out, plan C, the keep, might be to go back to school or start a small side business. The failure of one layer doesn't mean total defeat. It just means you fall back to the next prepared position. It creates resilience. The military strategist Karl von Clausewitz famously wrote in the early 19th century that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Modern business thinking has embraced this idea. In their book Great by Choice, Jim Collins and Morton T. Hansen describe a concept they call firing bullets, then cannonballs. Instead of betting everything on one big, untested idea, a cannonball, successful companies first fire a lot of small bullets. They run small tests, pilot programs, and trial runs. These are their outer defenses. Many of them will fail, and that's okay. The cost is low. But when one of the bullets hits a target showing promise, they then concentrate their resources and fire the cannonball. They commit fully to the now validated idea. This is a corporate version of defense in depth. It's a system for dealing with uncertainty. It accepts that failure is part of the process and builds a structure around it so that small failures inform you instead of destroying you. But can you have too many backup plans? Does building a defense in depth signal a lack of commitment to your primary goal, making failure a self-fulfilling prophecy? And how do you know when to fall back to the next line of defense versus when you should stand and fight for the one you're on? Number 18. What if your greatest weakness is actually your greatest strength in disguise? The feigned retreat. It's one of the oldest and most dangerous tricks in the book. An army pretends to panic and run away. The enemy, seeing their opponents fleeing in disarray, gets overconfident. They break their own disciplined formation and charge forward, eager for the kill. This is exactly what the retreating army wants. Once the enemy is disorganized, overextended, and in unfamiliar territory, the retreating army turns around and attacks. They have lured their opponent into a trap. The most famous use of this was by William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. The Saxon shield wall was unbreakable, so William ordered his Norman knights to charge and then pretend to flee. The inexperienced Saxon militia couldn't resist the temptation. They broke ranks and chased the Normans down the hill. Once the Saxons were on the open ground, their shield wall was gone. William's cavalry turned and cut them to pieces. It was a high-risk move. If the feigned retreat turns into a real one, you lose. But if it works, it can turn an opponent's strength, their discipline, into a fatal weakness. In our lives, we are taught to never retreat, never quit, never show weakness. But sometimes a strategic withdrawal is the smartest move you can make. It's not about giving up. It's about changing the terms of the engagement. It's about luring a problem into a position where it can be defeated. Let's say you're in a pointless argument. The other person is just getting more and more aggressive. Your instinct is to fight back, to win the point. But what if you feign to retreat? You say, you know what, you're right. I need to think about that. You concede the battle. The other person feels victorious. They drop their guard. This de-escalates the situation. But you haven't given up on the war. You've just retreated to ground where you can re-engage later when emotions aren't running high. You've lured their anger into a trap of your calmness. It can also apply to your career. Maybe you take a step back, accept a less prestigious role to learn a new skill. It looks like a retreat, but you are repositioning yourself for a much bigger advance later on. You are trading a small, visible loss for a huge future gain. In psychology, there's a concept called strategic non-action. It's particularly relevant in therapy and conflict resolution. A 2018 paper in the journal Negotiation and Conflict Management Research explored how deliberate inaction can be a powerful tool. It's not passive avoidance. It's an active choice to not engage, to let a situation evolve, or to let an opponent exhaust themselves. This is the essence of the feigned retreat. You appear to be doing nothing. You appear to be weak, but you are actually observing, learning, and waiting for the opportune moment. You are letting the other person's momentum become their undoing. Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, written over 2,500 years ago, said, "Pretend to be weak that he may grow arrogant." It's a timeless piece of psychological strategy. You use your opponent's own ego against them. But how do you tell the difference between a strategic feigned retreat and just plain giving up? What is the psychological cost of appearing weak, even as a tactic? And could you use this strategy so often that you forget how to stand your ground and fight when it's truly necessary? Number 17. When is it time to stop gathering information and finally act? Espionage and reconnaissance. No sane medieval commander would march his army into unknown territory without sending scouts ahead. They needed to know the lay of the land. Where are the rivers? Are there forests where an enemy could hide? Where are the best places to camp? They also needed to know about the enemy. How many are there? Are they well-fed and confident, or starving and demoralized? This information was life and death. The Mongols under Genghis Khan were masters of this. Their incredible conquests in the 13th century were built on a sophisticated network of spies and scouts. Before they ever invaded a new territory, they would have detailed maps and a deep understanding of the political rivalries, economic weaknesses, and military strengths of their target. They often knew more about a kingdom than the king himself. Their battles were often won before the first arrow was ever fired, because they had better information. In life, we call this doing your homework, or due diligence. Before you make any big decision, changing careers, buying a house, starting a business, even having a difficult conversation, you need to scout the territory. You need to gather information. What are the risks? What are the opportunities? Who are the key players? What are their motivations? Jumping in blind is a recipe for disaster. If you're going for a job interview, you research the company. You learn about their recent projects, their challenges, their culture. You try to understand the person who will be interviewing you. You are conducting reconnaissance. You are mapping the battlefield so you know what to expect. This isn't about being sneaky. It's about being prepared. Good information reduces uncertainty. It turns a gamble into a calculated risk. The psychologist and economist Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for his work on decision making. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he describes two systems of thought. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and emotional. System 2 is slower, more deliberate, and logical. Our gut reactions, our System 1, are often what get us into trouble. We jump to conclusions based on incomplete information. Reconnaissance is the act of engaging System 2. It's the deliberate process of slowing down, gathering data, and challenging your initial assumptions before you make a move. A 2006 study by researchers at the University of Leeds found that business plans are often wildly over-optimistic. Entrepreneurs fall in love with their idea and ignore the data. They fail to do proper reconnaissance. Successful strategists, in business as in war, fight this bias. They value good intelligence over optimistic projections. But at what point does information gathering become procrastination? How do you know when you have enough information to act in a world where data is infinite? And is it possible that too much reconnaissance can lead to analysis paralysis, where you become so aware of the risks that you are too afraid to ever leave your camp? Number 16, what if your most powerful weapon is your own mind? It's psychological warfare. War isn't just fought with swords and arrows, it's also fought in the minds of the soldiers. A medieval army would try to intimidate its enemy before a battle even began. They would make their army look bigger than it was by having camp followers bang pots and pans to create noise. They would use banners and loud horns to seem more imposing. During a siege, they would catapult diseased animal carcasses or even the heads of captured enemies over the walls. The goal wasn't just to cause disease, it was to cause terror, to break the will of the defenders, to make them believe that their situation was hopeless. Vlad the Impaler, the 15th century ruler of Wallachia, was a master of this. He famously created a forest of the impaled, lining the road to his capital with thousands of his enemies on spikes. This horrifying spectacle was designed to crush the morale of the invading Ottoman army. It was brutally effective. You use and experience psychological warfare every day, even if you don't call it that. In a negotiation, when someone makes a very high or very low first offer, they are trying to anchor your expectations. They are managing your perception of what is possible. When a colleague subtly questions your competence in a meeting, they are engaging in a small-scale psychological attack. On the positive side, when you give yourself a pep talk before a big presentation, you are using psychological warfare on your own anxiety. It's all about managing perceptions, morale, and confidence in your own and others. The key is to recognize when these tactics are being used on you and to learn how to use them ethically to bolster your own position. It's about building your own morale so high that it becomes a shield and projecting a quiet confidence that can make opponents think twice. The placebo effect is one of the most studied phenomena in medicine. It's pure psychological warfare. A patient is given a sugar pill, but is told it's a powerful new drug. In a significant number of cases, their condition improves. The belief itself creates a physiological change. A 2014 study from the University of Colorado Boulder showed that placebos can trigger the release of dopamine in the brain, a neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. The mind's belief can literally change the body's chemistry. This is the power you are tapping into. When you convince yourself that you are prepared and capable, you are giving yourself a placebo for confidence. Your belief in your own success makes that success more likely. When you project that confidence, it affects how others perceive you. They start to believe it too. You are shaping the reality of the situation by first shaping the mind. But where's the line between confident self-promotion and delusional arrogance? Can you become so focused on the psychological game that you neglect the real practical work that needs to be done? And if we learn to manipulate the perceptions of others for our own gain, do we risk losing our own authentic self in the process? Number 15, is it ever? Right to burn everything down and start over. Scorched earth. This is one of the most brutal and desperate strategies in the medieval playbook. When an army was retreating, it would systematically destroy anything that might be useful to the pursuing enemy. They would burn crops, poison wells, and demolish buildings. The goal was to leave behind a barren wasteland, a scorched earth, so the enemy army could not find food or shelter. It would slow them down, weaken them, and maybe even force them to abandon their invasion. When the Russian army retreated before Napoleon's Grande Army in 1812, they used this tactic with devastating effect. The French army marched deeper and deeper into a desolate, empty Russia. By the time they reached Moscow, which was also set on fire, their supply lines were stretched to the breaking point and they were unprepared for the brutal Russian winter. The scorched earth policy didn't defeat Napoleon in a single battle, but it created the conditions that destroyed his army. It's a strategy of last resort. You have to be willing to destroy your own assets to prevent a greater loss. This is a powerful, if painful, metaphor for life. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to burn the ships. To cut your losses completely, this could mean quitting a toxic job without having another one lined up. It could mean ending a long-term relationship that is making you miserable. It could mean walking away from a business you've poured your life into because you know it's failing. It's a scorched earth policy for your own life. You are deliberately destroying a part of your present to save your future. It's not about revenge. The Russians weren't burning their own villages to spite Napoleon. They were doing it to survive. When you leave that toxic job, you're not doing it to hurt your boss. You are doing it to save your own mental health. You are denying the enemy, the toxic environment, the ability to continue feeding off of your energy and talent. It's a painful, radical act of self-preservation. The sunk cost fallacy is a well-known concept in behavioral economics, pioneered by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. It's our tendency to continue with an endeavor because we have already invested time, money, or effort in it, even if the current evidence suggests it's a bad idea. We think, I've already put so much into this relationship, I can't leave now. Or, we've spent millions on this project, we can't just abandon it. A scorched earth strategy is the ultimate antidote to the sunk cost fallacy. It's the conscious decision to say, it doesn't matter what I've already invested. The future of this path is bleak. I am destroying it now to prevent it from destroying me later. It requires immense courage to ignore the past costs and make a decision based only on future prospects. But at what point does a strategic scorched earth policy become simple self-sabotage? How do you know if you are making a brave choice to save your future, or just impulsively destroying your present out of fear or frustration? And if you burn the fields of your past, you also destroy the fertile soil you might need for future growth. Number 14, how do you accomplish something big? Concentrating force. A medieval army was a complex thing. It had cavalry, archers, and infantry. A good general knew not to spread them out evenly along the battle line. That would make the whole army thin and weak everywhere. Instead, they would find a weak point in the enemy's formation, a tired unit, a gap in the line, a section on unfavorable ground. Then they would concentrate their best troops, their force, and smash into that single point with overwhelming power. This was the principle of mass imprinted, or concentration, later articulated by military theorists like Karl von Clausewitz. The goal is to be stronger at the decisive point, even if you are weaker overall. Once you break through that one point, you can roll up the rest of the enemy line from the flank and rear. Yet you don't have to beat the whole army at once, you just have to beat one part of it decisively. The Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, while not medieval, is a perfect example. Napoleon deliberately weakened his right flank to lure the enemy in, then concentrated his main force to smash through their overstretched center, splitting their army in two and achieving a stunning victory despite being outnumbered. We all have limited force, limited time, energy, money, and focus, and we tend to spread it thin. We try to work on 5 projects at once. We try to get good at 10 different hobbies. We have a to-do list with 30 items on it. Our force is distributed so widely that we make very little impact anywhere. We are weak everywhere. The strategy of concentrating force means choosing one point, one crucial point, and applying all your energy there until it breaks. If you want to change your career, don't just vaguely look at job postings. Concentrate your force. For 1 month, dedicate all your available professional energy to one thing, rewriting your resume. The next month, concentrate all your force on networking. The month after, on interview practice. You are hitting one point at a time with overwhelming power. Instead of making tiny bits of progress on many fronts, you achieve a decisive breakthrough on one, which then makes the next steps easier. The concept of deep work, popularized by author Cal Newport, is the modern equivalent of concentrating force. He defines it as the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task. And Newport argues that in our hyper-distracted world, the ability to concentrate our mental force on a single, hard problem is becoming increasingly rare and therefore increasingly valuable. Research on multitasking confirms this. A 2009 study from Stanford University found that heavy multitaskers are actually worse at switching between tasks, filtering irrelevant information, and using their working memory than people who prefer to do one thing at a time. By spreading their attention, they were weakening their cognitive force at every point. To achieve anything of value, you must resist the urge to do everything at once. You must pick your point of attack and concentrate your force. But how do you choose the right point to concentrate on when so many things seem urgent? If you focus all your energy on one aspect of your life, like your career, do you risk a catastrophic failure in other areas, like your health or relationships? And what happens when you concentrate all your force on a single point and it still doesn't break? Number 13, what is the one thing you can develop that no one else has? The longbow advantage. For much of the Middle Ages, the battlefield was dominated by the heavily armored knight on horseback. Then, in the 14th and 15th centuries, the English developed a weapon that changed everything: the Welsh longbow. It wasn't a fancy piece of technology, it was a 6-foot staff of yew wood. But in the hands of a trained archer, it was devastating. It had a longer range, a faster rate of fire, and more penetrating power than any other bow of its time. An English longbowman could shoot 10 to 12 arrows a minute, while a crossbowman might only manage 2. At battles like Crecy 1346 and Agincourt 1415, outnumbered, English armies used the longbow to destroy the flower of French chivalry. The knights charged, and they were cut down by a storm of arrows before they even reached the English lines. The longbow wasn't something you could learn to use in a week. It took years of constant practice to develop the muscle and skill to use it effectively. Skeletons of longbowmen found on the shipwrecked Mary Rose show, they had enlarged left arms and deformed shoulders from the strain. It was a hard-won, specialized skill, and for a time it gave the English a decisive asymmetric advantage. In your life and career, what is your longbow? What is the one skill or ability you can develop that gives you a unique advantage? It's not about being slightly better than others at a lot of things, it's about being exceptionally good at one thing that is valuable. It might be public speaking, it might be coding in a specific in-demand language. It might be an incredible ability to listen and make people feel heard. It might be your talent for simplifying complex ideas. This is your longbow. It's something that takes years of dedicated practice to master. It's not easy. It might even feel like a strain. But once you have it, it allows you to compete and win in situations where you might otherwise be outmatched. You may not have the heavy armor of an Ivy League degree or a powerful family connection, but with your longbow, your specialized skill, you can hit targets that they can't. Economist and author Nassim Nicholas Taleb talks about the barbell strategy. You should be extremely conservative in some areas of your life to avoid ruin and take lots of small, high-risk bets in others. Developing a longbow skill fits this. It's a high-risk, high-reward bet. You invest thousands of hours into one specific skill, hoping it will pay off. But the modern application is about finding a niche. A 2017 report by Upwork, a freelancing platform, found that specialized skills were the fastest growing segment of the freelance market. Generalists struggled to compete, but specialists in areas like machine learning or blockchain development could command huge fees. They had developed a longbow, they had a skill that was rare, hard to replicate, and in high demand. They didn't need to be good at everything, they just needed to be undeniable at one thing. But what if you spend a decade mastering a skill, your longbow, only to have it become obsolete due to new technology? How do you balance the need for deep specialization with the need for broad adaptability in a fast-changing world? And is the relentless pursuit of a single advantage a healthy way to live, or does it lead to a fragile, one-dimensional existence? Number 12, do you know how to rest? Logistics and supply lines. We think of medieval armies as just marching and fighting. But the real genius of a long campaign was logistics. An army of thousands of men and horses needs a staggering amount of food, water, and supplies every single day. A horse alone needs about 25 pounds of fodder daily. If the supply lines, the chain of wagons and ships bringing supplies from the rear were cut, the army would starve. It wouldn't matter how brave the knights were. A hungry army cannot fight. The First Crusade, launched in 1096, was a logistical nightmare. The first wave, the People's Crusade, was little more than an armed mob with no supply plan. They starved and were slaughtered long before they reached the Holy Land. The later, more successful waves were led by nobles who understood the crucial importance of securing ports and maintaining supply lines from the sea. The war was won not just by fighting, but by eating. Logistics isn't glamorous. It's the hard, boring work that makes everything else possible. In your life, your energy, health, and well-being are your supply line. You can't run a long campaign, build a career, raise a family, pursue a passion, if you are exhausted, burned out, and running on empty. Logistics is the boring stuff that no one wants to talk about. It's getting enough sleep. It's eating decent food. It's taking the day off. It's managing your money so you aren't constantly stressed. It's setting boundaries so your energy isn't drained by people and tasks that don't matter. We love to celebrate the Harj, the all-nighter, the hustle, the relentless push forward. But a smart general knows that the army must also make camp. It must rest. It must resupply. If you neglect your logistics, your campaign is doomed to fail, no matter how brilliant your initial attack is. You will simply run out of the resources you need to keep going. Dr. Anders Ericsson's research on deliberate practice, made famous by Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule, is often misunderstood. People focus on the sheer volume of practice, but a key part of Ericsson's work, detailed in his book Peak, is the importance of rest and recovery. The top performers he studied, musicians, athletes, chess masters, didn't just practice more. They practiced more intensely, in focused bursts, and then they rested more deliberately. They understood that growth doesn't happen during the stress, but during the recovery afterwards. They slept more than average people. They took naps. They understood logistics. A 2011 study on sleep published in Current Biology showed that sleep plays a critical role in consolidating memory and solidifying learning. When you sleep, your brain is doing the vital logistical work of filing away the day's experiences. Without that supply line of rest, the learning and the work of the day is lost. But in a culture that glorifies being busy, how can we truly embrace rest without feeling guilty or lazy? What's the difference between strategic rest for resupply and simple, unproductive avoidance of our duties? And can we overplan our logistics to the point where we become too rigid to seize an unexpected opportunity that requires a sudden, all-out charge? Number 11. Are you fighting your opponent, or are you fighting the situation? Attrition. Sometimes you can't win a quick, decisive victory. Your enemy is too strong, too well defended, or too similar in strength to you. In these cases, medieval warfare often became a grim contest of attrition. The goal was not to win a brilliant victory in a single day, but to slowly grind down the enemy's ability to fight. You would try to inflict small but constant losses. You'd raid their supply lines. You'd start skirmishes. You would force them to stay on high alert, exhausting their men. The 100 Years' War between England and France, 1337 to 1453, was characterized by long periods of attritional warfare. It wasn't about one big battle, but about which kingdom could sustain the costs of war in money and in lives for the longest time. It's a strategy of endurance. The winner is the one who is still standing when everyone else has collapsed from exhaustion. You are in a war of attrition with many of your biggest goals: learning a new skill, paying off debt, saving for retirement. You won't achieve victory in a single day. There is no glorious, decisive battle. It's a long, slow grind. The temptation is to go all out at the beginning. You go to the gym for 2 hours a day every day. You put half your paycheck towards your debt. You study for 4 hours a night. But you quickly burn out. You get injured. You run out of money. You exhaust yourself. The strategy of attrition teaches a different lesson. It's about sustainability. Can you do this for a year? For 5 years? It's better to go to the gym for 30 minutes, 3 times a week, every week, for a decade, than to go for 2 hours a day for 1 month and then quit. It's about inflicting small, consistent losses on the problem. It's about winning by not quitting. The winner is the one with the most patience. Angela Duckworth, a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, developed the concept of grit. In her book of the same name, she defines grit as the tendency to sustain passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Her research conducted on West Point cadets, National Spelling Bee contestants, and rookie teachers found that grit, not talent, not IQ, was the best predictor of success. Gritty individuals don't expect a quick victory. They understand they are in a war of attrition. They are prepared for setbacks. They see failure not as a reason to quit, but as a normal part of a long campaign. They just keep showing up. They understand that success is not an event, but a process of relentless grinding endurance. It's not glamorous, it's just effective. But how do you maintain motivation during a long grinding war of attrition when there are no visible signs of progress? What's the difference between admirable grit and a foolish refusal to quit a battle that is truly unwinnable? And can a life lived as a constant war of attrition grind down your own spirit, even if you eventually win? Number 10. How do you attack an idea? The Shavochi. This was a particularly nasty medieval tactic favored by the English during the Hundred Years' War. It wasn't about capturing castles or winning battles. It was a mounted raid, a kavachi, deep into enemy territory. The goal was to cause as much economic and psychological damage as possible. The raiding party would burn villages, destroy crops, and terrorize the local population. They were deliberately avoiding the enemy's main army. This had a dual purpose. First, it crippled the enemy's economy, making it harder for them to raise and supply their armies. Second, it was a massive psychological blow. It showed the common people that their king and their lords could not protect them. It undermined the very foundation of the feudal contract. The Black Prince's Shavochi of 1355 was a brutal but highly effective example, carving a path of destruction across southern France and eroding the French king's authority. You can't always take on a problem directly. Sometimes the problem isn't a single army you can fight. It's a system, a bureaucracy, a toxic culture, a bad idea. Trying to fight it head on is like charging a castle wall. A Shavochi is a different approach. You don't attack the center of power. You raid the edges, you create small, disruptive actions that undermine its authority and resources. Let's say you're fighting a bad policy at your company. A direct confrontation with the CEO might be suicide. A chevauché would be to start small. Have one-on-one conversations with colleagues to show them the negative impact of the policy. Present data in a small team meeting that questions its effectiveness. Build a coalition of support quietly. You aren't attacking the policy. You are raiding its supply lines, its legitimacy, its consensus, its unquestioned authority. You are proving that the king, the policy, cannot protect its people. The company's goals from the damage it is causing. In social movements, this is called disruptive protest. Think of the sit-ins during the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. The protesters didn't try to fight the entire system of segregation head-on. They conducted a Shavochi. They targeted a specific, visible, and economically vulnerable part of the system, the lunch counters. By sitting at a whites-only counter, they weren't just asking for a sandwich. They were disrupting the business, challenging the social order, and showing the world the ugliness of the system in a way that couldn't be ignored. It was a raid, it was targeted, it was designed to cause economic and psychological pressure. As documented in works like Taylor Branch's Parting the Waters, these small, focused actions, when repeated, created a crisis of authority that the larger system could not sustain. But where is the line between a strategic Shavochi and simple vandalism or pointless troublemaking? Can you raid the edges of a system for so long that you become defined as an outsider, losing any ability to influence the center? And is there a risk that this tactic designed to undermine an enemy ends up hurting innocent people caught in the crossfire? Number 9, are you building your life on rock or on sand? The Code of Chivalry wasn't just about opening doors for ladies, it was a complex moral, religious, and social code that knights were supposed to follow. It was a set of rules for a violent profession. The code varied, but it generally included virtues like courage, honor, loyalty to one's lord, generosity, and protecting the weak. Of course, many knights failed to live up to this code. It was an ideal, not always a reality. But it was a powerful ideal. It provided a foundation, a set of principles that guided a knight's actions in a chaotic and brutal world. You know, it was a personal constitution. It told a knight what he should do when no one was watching. It was the source of his internal strength and his external reputation. A knight who kept his word and fought with honor was more respected, more trusted, and ultimately more powerful than one who was known to be treacherous. Sir William Marshall, a 12th century English knight, was legendary for his chivalry. He served 5 different kings, and his reputation for loyalty and integrity was his greatest asset. What is your code? In a world with endless choices and shifting moral landscapes, what are the non-negotiable principles you live by? This is your personal code of chivalry. It's the set of rules you apply to yourself. It might be always tell the truth, even when it's hard. Never make a promise you can't keep. Finish what you start. Leave things better than you found them. This code is your foundation. When you face a difficult decision, you don't have to invent a new moral framework every time. You fall back on your code. It simplifies the complex. It guides your actions. It builds your reputation. People learn that your word is your bond. They learn that you are reliable. They learn that you have integrity. This reputation, this honor becomes your greatest strength. It's the bedrock on which you build your career, your relationships, and your life. Without a code, you are just reacting to events. With a code, you are acting with purpose. Stephen Covey, in his massively influential book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, published in 1989, talks about being principle-centered. His second habit is begin with the end in mind, which involves creating a personal mission statement. This is essentially a modern corporate version of a knight chivalric code. It's about defining your core values and principles and then using them as a compass to guide all your decisions. Covey argues that principles are like natural laws. They are objective realities. We can't break them. We can only break ourselves against them. Research in positive psychology has shown that people who live a life aligned with their core values report higher levels of well-being and life satisfaction. A 2012 study in the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology found that value-congruent behavior is linked to lower levels of stress and depression. Your code is not just a moral luxury, it's a psychological necessity. But what happens when 2 of your core principles come into conflict in a real-world dilemma? If your code is too rigid, does it prevent you from being flexible and pragmatic when you need to be? And can you hold yourself to a strict personal code if the world around you and the people in it play by a completely different set of rules? Number 8. Who are you trusting? Breaking the bridge. There's a famous story, possibly apocryphal, about Hernan Cortes, the Spanish conquistador. When he landed in Mexico in 1519 with his small army, he faced overwhelming odds against the vast Aztec Empire. To ensure his men were fully committed, he supposedly gave an order to burn the ships. There could be no retreat. The only way home was through victory. This is an extreme example of breaking the bridge. You deliberately destroy your only path of retreat. This forces a level of commitment and focus that is otherwise impossible to achieve. The medieval equivalent was a commander who, after crossing a river to attack an enemy, would immediately destroy the bridge behind him. It sent a clear message to his own troops, and to the enemy: we are not leaving. We will win or we will die here. It's a terrifyingly high-stakes gamble. It turns a battle into an existential crisis. This is a strategy to be used rarely, if ever, but it's a powerful concept. It's about creating total commitment. We often go into new ventures with one foot out the door. We start a new business, but we keep our old job just in case. We commit to a new relationship, but we keep our options open. We have a bridge back to our old life. This divided focus can be the very thing that causes us to fail. Breaking the bridge means making a decision. So final that you cannot go back. It means quitting the job. It means deleting the dating apps. It means investing the money. You are raising the stakes on yourself. You are manufacturing a situation where the only option is to succeed. This can unlock a level of creativity, resourcefulness, and sheer desperation that you never knew you had. You have to make it work, because there is no other way. Psychologists talk about decision fatigue. The more choices we have to make, the worse our decision-making gets. By breaking the bridge, you make one big, hard decision that eliminates thousands of future small ones. You no longer have to ask yourself every day, should I keep going or should I retreat? The option of retreat is gone. This frees up enormous mental energy to focus on the only path forward. A 2010 study published in the journal Science showed how making choices depletes a finite resource of self-control. By making a single, irreversible choice, you conserve that precious resource for the actual work. It's a way of tricking your own psychology. You are creating an external constraint that forces an internal commitment. But is this strategy an act of courage or an act of foolish desperation? How do you know when it's the right time to break the bridge versus when it's vital to keep your options open? And what happens to your mind and your spirit if you break the bridge, commit everything, and still fail? Number 7, are you using the right tool for the job? The trebuchet principle. The trebuchet was the ultimate medieval siege engine. It was a massive catapult that could hurl huge stones, sometimes weighing over 300 pounds at castle walls from a great distance. It worked on the principle of leverage. A huge counterweight on one end of a long arm was dropped, causing the other end of the arm, which held the projectile in a sling, to whip upwards at incredible speed. It was a masterpiece of physics. A relatively small amount of effort winching the counterweight up could be stored and then released to create an immense amount of destructive force. It was about using a system of leverage to turn a small input into a massive output. It wasn't about brute strength, it was about smart application of force. During the 1266 siege of Kenilworth, the royal army built a massive trebuchet nicknamed Warwolf that terrorized the castle's defenders. This is the principle of leverage in your own life. You are looking for the places where a small, focused effort can produce an outsized result. It's the opposite of grinding linear work. You're not trying to move the rock with your own muscles. You're building a machine to do it for you. Writing a book is a trebuchet. It takes a lot of effort up front, winching the counterweight. But once it's done, that one piece of work can be read by thousands of people, generating influence or income for years. Building a system at work that automates a tedious task is a trebuchet. A small investment of time now saves hundreds of hours later. Learning a key skill like coding or effective communication is a trebuchet. That one skill can be applied in dozens of different situations to create massive value. You are always asking, what is the small hinge that swings the biggest door? The Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, is a statistical observation that applies to the trebuchet principle. First described by Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto in 1896, it states that for many events, roughly 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. They ruthlessly identify that critical 20%, the counterweight option, and they focus their energy there. They stop trying to do everything. They focus on the things that provide the most leverage. This is the core of Tim Ferriss's 2007 book, The 4-Hour Workweek. It's not about being lazy. It's about being effective by applying your force only where it has the greatest impact. But can a life focused only on leverage lead you to devalue the simple, honest, and linear work that is often necessary and meaningful? If you're always looking for the shortcut or the hack, do you miss out on the character-building struggle of the long, hard road? And what if you spend all your time building a magnificent trebuchet, only to find you've aimed it at the wrong wall? Number 6, do you know how to fail? Through the forlorn hope. In siege warfare, once a breach was made in a castle wall, the first group of soldiers to charge through was called the forlorn hope. It was a near-suicidal mission. Their chances of survival were incredibly low. They would be charging into a narrow, confined space straight into the teeth of the most desperate defenders. But if they succeeded, the rewards were immense. They would get a huge share of the loot, and any soldier who survived would almost certainly be promoted to an officer. It was a high-risk, high-reward gamble. The term comes from the Dutch verloren hoop, which means los troop. It was an accepted, calculated risk. The commander knew he would lose most of these men. But it was a necessary sacrifice to win the castle. You don't need to volunteer for a suicide mission. But the principle of the forlorn hope is about understanding and taking calculated, high-stakes risks. These are the moments in your life where you have to go all in on something that will probably fail, but if it succeeds, it will change everything. Asking for that huge promotion, starting the ambitious business, moving to a new country for a dream opportunity. These are your forlorn hope moments. You are charging the breach. You have to accept that the most likely outcome is failure. You have to be okay with that. If you only ever take safe bets, you will only ever get safe, average results. Or breakthroughs don't happen in the safe zone. They happen in the breach, in the place of maximum danger and maximum opportunity. It's not about being reckless. It's about seeing a rare opportunity and having the courage to be the first one through the gap, knowing the odds are against you. In the world of venture capital, this is the entire business model. Venture capitalists know that the vast majority of the startups they invest in will fail. A 2012 study by Shikhar Ghosh at Harvard Business School found that about 75% of venture-backed startups don't return their investors' capital. They are all forlorn hopes. But the VCs don't care about the 75% that fail. They are betting that one or two of the companies in their portfolio will be a massive success, a Google, a Facebook, an Amazon, and the returns from that one winner will more than cover all the losses. They have a portfolio of calculated risks. This is a mindset you can apply to your own life. You can try many things, new projects, new hobbies, new connections. Most will go nowhere. But one might be the breakthrough that changes your trajectory. You have to be willing to lead the charge, to fail, and to charge again. But how do you differentiate between a calculated risk and a stupid gamble? What is the psychological toll of repeatedly volunteering for missions that are designed for failure, even if there is a small chance of a huge reward? And if you succeed, if you are the one who survives the charge, how do you live with the knowledge that you climbed to success on the backs of others who failed? Number 5, how do you make a group of individuals into a team? The motley crew. Medieval armies, especially mercenary companies, were often not uniform, professional forces. They were motley crews. A single company might have Genoese crossbowmen, German knights, Flemish pikemen, and English archers. They all spoke different languages, had different fighting styles, and were often loyal only to their paymaster. On the surface, this looks like a recipe for disaster, but a skilled captain could turn this diversity into a strength. He could use each unit for its specialized purpose. The crossbowmen could weaken the enemy from a distance. The knights could deliver a devastating charge. The pikemen could form a defensive square to repel cavalry. Instead of trying to make everyone the same, he would use their differences to create a flexible, multi-talented force that could handle any situation. The White Company, a famous 14th century mercenary group led by Sir John Hawkwood, was a prime example of such a successful, diverse fighting force. We are often told that a great team is one where everyone is on the same page and aligned. This can easily slide into groupthink, where everyone is afraid to disagree. The motley crew strategy suggests that real strength comes from diversity. Not just diversity of background, but diversity of thought, skills, and perspectives. In a team, you don't want everyone to be a charismatic leader. You also need the quiet, detail-oriented analyst. You need the skeptic who questions every assumption. You need the creative dreamer who comes up with wild ideas. A good leader doesn't try to force everyone into the same mold. They act like a mercenary captain. They identify the unique strengths of each person and deploy them where they will be most effective. The goal isn't harmony, it's effectiveness. And effectiveness often comes from the creative friction of different minds rubbing against each other. A 2015 study by the McKinsey consulting firm found that companies in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity in management were 35% more likely to have financial returns above the industry mean. Some companies with more gender diversity were 15% more likely to outperform. This isn't just about social justice. It's about strategic advantage. Diverse teams bring a wider range of experiences and viewpoints to a problem. They are less prone to groupthink and more likely to come up with innovative solutions. They are a modern motley crew. As the study notes, diversity is a competitive differentiator. A team of clones, no matter how talented each individual is, has blind spots. A diverse team can see the whole battlefield, but how do you manage the very real conflicts and communication challenges that arise from a team of vastly different people? At what point does healthy, creative friction just become dysfunctional infighting? And can a team composed of self-interested mercenaries ever achieve the same level of loyalty and commitment as a team united by a single shared culture? Number 4, what message are you sending? The herald's message. Before a battle or a siege, a herald would often be sent to the enemy camp. He was a messenger, and his person was considered inviolable. He would ride under a flag of truce to deliver a message from his lord. The message might be a declaration of war, a demand for surrender, or an offer of terms. The language was crucial. It had to be completely clear, direct, and unambiguous. There was no room for misinterpretation when lives were at stake. The herald would state the terms. Surrender the city by sunrise, and the lives of the citizens will be spared. Refuse, and the city will be sacked, and no quarter will be given. It was a formal, ritualized form of communication designed for maximum clarity in a high-stakes situation. It cut through the noise and laid out the facts, the demands, and the consequences. How clear is your communication? In our world of endless emails, texts, and meetings, our messages often get lost. We use vague language, we hint at what we want instead of asking for it directly. We use corporate jargon to sound smart, but all we do is create confusion. The Herald's message is a strategy for clear, direct communication. When the stakes are higher in a performance review, a relationship discussion, a business negotiation, you need to be a herald. State your position clearly. State what you want. State the consequences, positive or negative. Don't bury your requests in 5 paragraphs of pleasantries. Be respectful, but be direct. I've completed all the goals we set out last year and have taken on these new responsibilities. I am asking for a 15% raise. If that's not possible, I need to understand what I need to do to get there. That is a herald's message. It is clear, honest, and leaves no room for doubt. Research consistently shows that clarity is a key component of effective leadership. A 2013 study on employee engagement by the consulting firm Blessing White found that clear communication of organizational direction and strategy was a major driver of employee satisfaction and commitment. When people don't know what is expected of them or, what the goals are, they become anxious and disengaged. The same is true in our personal lives. According to psychologist Dr. John Gottman, whose research on thousands of couples allowed him to predict divorce with over 90% accuracy, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for a relationship is stonewalling the refusal to communicate. The antidote is clear, direct, and honest communication. It's about being willing to deliver the herald's message even when it's uncomfortable. But can a message be too direct to the point of being brutal or demotivating? How do you balance the herald's clarity with the need for empathy and diplomacy in complex human relationships? And what happens when you send a perfectly clear message and the other side simply refuses to listen or accept the terms? Number 3, what do you do after the battle is over? The post-battle triage. After a medieval battle, the field was a scene of chaos and carnage. The fighting was over, but the work had just begun. The first priority was triage. The wounded needed to be sorted. Those who could be saved were taken to surgeons. Those with mortal wounds were given last rites. It was a brutal but necessary process of assessment. At the same time, equipment had to be salvaged. Swords, armor, and arrows were valuable and had to be collected and repaired. The dead had to be buried to prevent disease, and most importantly, the commanders had to assess the situation. What were our losses? What were the enemy's losses? Did we achieve our objective? What did we learn from this engagement? What is our next move? The period immediately after the battle was a critical time for recovery, learning, and planning. A victory could be turned into a defeat if it was not properly consolidated. We don't do this enough in our own lives. After we finish a big project, win a major contract, or even have a significant failure, our tendency is to just move on to the next thing immediately. We don't perform a triage. We don't take the time to properly assess what just happened. A post-battle triage for your life means taking a deliberate pause after any significant event, positive or negative. You ask the hard questions: what went well, what went wrong, what did I learn about myself, my team, my process? What resources, time, energy, money did I lose, and how can I recover them? What was the real outcome, and how does it affect my overall strategy? This isn't about dwelling on the past. It's about extracting every ounce of learning from the experience so you are stronger and smarter for the next battle. It turns every event, win or lose, into a lesson. The U.S. Army uses a process called the After Action Review AAR. It was developed in the 1970s and is now a cornerstone of its organizational learning. After every mission, training, or reel, units conduct an AAR. It's a simple, structured discussion that answers 4 questions. What was supposed to happen? What actually happened? Why was there a difference? What will we do to sustain what worked and improve what didn't? There is no rank in an AAR. A private can criticize a general. The goal is total honesty, focused on learning, not on placing blame. This is a formal system of triage. It is a major reason why the Army is considered one of the world's premier learning organizations. It has institutionalized the process of learning from both success and failure. But how can you conduct an honest triage of your own actions when your ego is so invested in defending them? When does a post-battle review cross the line into obsessive, unproductive rumination over past mistakes? And is it possible to learn the wrong lessons from an event, leading you to make even bigger mistakes in the future? Number 2, how do you beat an enemy you can't see? With the siege mentality, when a castle was under siege, the defenders were trapped. They couldn't go out. Help was uncertain. They were surrounded by a hostile force. Their entire world shrank to the space within those stone walls. Their strategy had to change completely. It was no longer about bold attacks and maneuvers, it was about patience, conservation of resources, and endurance. And they had to make their food and water last. They had to repair the walls as they were damaged. So they had to keep their morale up, day after day, week after week. The goal was simple: outlast the enemy. They knew the attacking army also had problems. It was expensive to keep an army in the field. They were vulnerable to disease and the changing seasons. The siege was a contest of wills. Who would break first? The defenders of Kenilworth Castle held out for 6 months in 1266, only surrendering in the end to disease and starvation, not to the enemy's attacks. You will face sieges in your life. It might be a long period of unemployment. It might be a chronic illness. It might be caring for an aging parent. It might be a creative project that seems to be going nowhere. You feel trapped. You feel surrounded. Your normal strategies don't work. This is when you need to adopt a siege mentality. You stop thinking about quick victories. You start thinking about survival and endurance. You focus on conserving your resources, your energy, your money, your emotional reserves. You do the small, necessary things every day. You repair the wall. You ration the food. You focus on what you can control inside your walls, not what you can't control outside. You stop looking for the one big breakthrough and instead focus on just getting through today and then tomorrow. It's a shift from an offensive mindset to a defensive one. It's not about winning, it's about not losing. The famous marshmallow test, a series of studies on delayed gratification conducted by psychologist Walter Mischel at Stanford University in the late 1960s and early 1970s, is a perfect illustration of the siege mentality on a small scale. Children were offered one marshmallow now, or two marshmallows if they could wait for 15 minutes. The children who were able to wait, who could endure the siege of temptation, were shown in follow-up studies to have better life outcomes years later. They had higher test scores and were healthier. The successful children didn't just have more willpower. They used strategies, they covered their eyes, they turned around, they distracted themselves. They were managing their internal state to outlast the difficult situation. They were playing a long game, conserving their mental resources to achieve a better outcome. But can a siege mentality, if held for too long, become a prison? If you get too used to a defensive crouch, do you lose the ability to go on the offensive when an opportunity arises? And how do you maintain hope and morale inside the walls when you have no idea how long the siege is going to last? Number one, what? If the obstacle is the way, the moat. The moat was a simple but brilliant defensive feature. It was a wide, deep ditch surrounding a castle, usually filled with water. It didn't kill anyone. It didn't destroy siege engines. It just created a problem. It was an obstacle. To attack the castle walls, you first had to figure out how to cross the moat. You could try to fill it in, but you would be under constant arrow fire. You could try to build a bridge, but the defenders would try to destroy it. The moat forced the attacker to pause, to waste time and resources, and to become vulnerable. It turned a direct path into a complex logistical challenge. The magnificent Bodiam Castle, built in the 14th century in England, is a perfect example of how a wide, placid moat could create an incredibly formidable defense. The obstacle itself was the primary defense. We spend most of our lives trying to find a path with no obstacles. We want the easy promotion, the smooth relationship, the workout plan that isn't hard. We see an obstacle, a moat, and we look for a different castle to attack. But what if the obstacle itself is the point? What if the moat is not in the way, but is the way? The process of figuring out how to cross the moat is what makes you stronger, smarter, and more creative. The hard-to-win client forces you to perfect your sales pitch. The difficult boss teaches you patience and how to manage up. The project with the tight budget forces you to become more innovative and resourceful. You thought your goal was to get to the other side, but the real growth happens while you're struggling in the moat. The obstacle is not something to be avoided, but something to be engaged with. It is a training ground. The philosophy of Stoicism, which originated in ancient Greece and was practiced by figures like the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, is built on this very idea. In his book, Meditations, written around 180 AD, Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The Stoics believe that we don't control what happens to us, but we have absolute control over how we respond. An obstacle is not a roadblock, it's an opportunity to practice a virtue, patience, courage, creativity, or wisdom. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is a direct descendant of this thinking. It teaches that it's not the event itself that causes us distress, but our interpretation of the event. By changing our perception of the obstacle, by seeing it as a challenge rather than a threat, we can change our entire emotional and practical response to it. But can this mindset be taken too far, leading us to romanticize suffering and stay in situations that are genuinely harmful or unwinnable? If we always see the obstacle as the way, how do we know when it's actually a dead end and the wise move is to simply turn back? And is it possible that by focusing so much on the journey through the moat, we forget what we were trying to achieve on the other side in the first place?